Why did you leave Conway in '88?
Well, it was monetary reasons.
Oh.
Yeah, we just hadn't had a raise in a long time, and I said I can't go on. And he said there wouldn't be any more raises, so I said, well, I don't really have much incentive to stay, you know. And in fact, his his accountant had already told him that, you know, the economy would eat up our salaries and stuff, but he said there wouldn't be any raises, so I said, well, I need to move on.
Right.
But it was after 20 years, you know.
Right. But you knew, but golly, you've known Conway longer than anybody in the music business.
Yeah, well, Pork Chop had been there. Pork Chop was there during the rock days, but I was there before Pork Chop, back in the old days, you know, as far as playing music, but we weren't playing professionally at the time.
John Hughey grew up in Arkansas, and if you can believe it, at 12 years old, he was in the same class as Conway Twitty, who was then simply known as Harold Jenkins. They became friends, and Harold got a gig playing guitar on KFFA radio with a group called the Arkansas Cotton Choppers. Played every Thursday night. John and Harold had their own side project at this time, playing rock and roll songs together. And it was right around then that John heard Eddie Arnold singing on the Purina Chow Show. Eddie Arnold was playing then with a steel guitarist named Little Roy Wiggins, and John immediately fell in love with that sound. So John started putting a pencil under the strings up by the nut of his old Gene Autry guitar, and he used a glass doorknob for a steel bar. He tuned up to E, and he went on trying to play like Little Roy Wiggins. And after about a year of playing like that, his dad finally ordered him a Sherwood Deluxe lap steel and amp. It was about $85 altogether for the set. On March 12, 1953, John Hughey joined a group from Memphis, Tennessee called Slim Rhodes and the Mother's Best Mountaineers. Now, it was quite a great little hillbilly band, actually, and one that still has a small following today. John ended up touring with them off and on for seemingly 8 or 10 years, but there's also some missing years in which it's not completely clear what John was doing musically. However, in 1968, at 35 years old, gets a phone call from his old friend Harold Jenkins, who we'll just go ahead and call Conway Twitty at this point. And he's playing with his band over in Moon Lake, Mississippi. He asks John if he'd like to sit in with them for the weekend. So John agrees and he goes to the gig. He ends up staying 20 years and 4 months from that day forward as Conway Twitty's primary steel guitarist and full-time band member. John left Conway Twitty in 1988 and went on to work for Loretta Lynn for about a year when an emerging artist named Vince Gill decided to put a band together, and he called up John Hughey asking him if he'd like to be the steel guitarist. John ended up staying with Vince Gill for 12 years and experienced his own resurgence as this kind of a steel guitar icon during this period. This was in part fueled by Vince's thrusting John into the spotlight, featuring John as a key part of his live show. Vince goes on to become a multi-award-winning top country artist in Nashville, of course, and John starts appearing at steel guitar conventions around this time. He was then inducted into the Steel Guitar Hall of Fame in 1996. John said of his 12 years with Vince that they were the greatest years of his life, professionally speaking. John Hughey ended his performing career with the legendary Time Jumpers Swing Ensemble that still plays weekly in Nashville, Tennessee. This was the third and final chapter in John's career as an iconic country steel guitarist, and in fact, a few of his most memorable performances would actually come during this final phase with the Time Jumpers. John Hughey passed away on November 18th, 2007. His funeral was held at the Hendersonville First Baptist Church in Nashville, Tennessee, and he's survived by his wife, Jean, and his only daughter, Cheryl Hughey.
Right now, I want to feature what I think is the greatest steel guitar player I've ever heard. He played with Conway Twitty for over 20 years and played on a million hit records. One of the greatest right here, Mr. John Hughey.
John Hughey's trademark style and sound. Well, John holds one of the top spots in the pedal steel world for feel and emotion. Along with Jimmy Day and Lloyd Green, John is one of the few players we've covered in this series who was known mostly for their expression of feeling in their playing, more so than their dexterity. The crying steel and Hughey land are two expressions often associated with John Hughey and his playing. The crying is John's use of vibrato in his bar hand and the sort of bar shiver that he did. And this is often done in the high register. When John gets above the 12th fret, some players refer to this destination as Hughey land. And John would often play very climactic and dazzling kind of pieces in that range where the space between the frets is very small. A lot of John's signature songs are immediately recognizable for their steel parts alone. Songs like Last Date and Lost in the Feeling by Conway, as well as Look at Us by Vince Gill. John says his biggest influence on the steel guitar was Little Roy Wiggins, who we mentioned was Eddie Arnold's longtime steel guitarist. John played a showbud guitar early in his career, but he appeared to have switched over to an Emmons push-pull guitar for most of his years with Conway Twitty. He also played a GFI guitar, I believe, and at the end of his career, he was most often seen playing a Zum steel. A Zum steel guitar is one that we've not seen much in this series yet, but it certainly is a well-known steel guitar manufacturer. John's setup apparently included as many as 9 floor pedals and 9 knee levers. So we're going to actually look now at an extended selection of clips of John Hughey playing in this video. We'll do that instead of doing a full discography of John's work. The reason for this is that John is one of these players that you really just want to sit and listen to. And then we'll look at some of John's work on the back neck, on the C6 tuning, and juxtapose that, so to speak, with his very well-known popular work on the front neck and the E9th tuning.
Been enjoying John Hughey over here, just playing up a storm all night on the C6th neck. But John is really famous for the other neck. If you've ever heard a Conway Twitty record or a Vince Gill record, he's the guy that did all that stuff. On the other neck. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to let him do this song for you on the other neck.
That's the Kroger neck.
The
That's
Kroger
the one that buys the
neck.
groceries.
That's right.
Oh, keep it country, John.
John had a pretty lengthy career as a session steel guitarist, but we're just going to look at a few selected albums here today, and you can check out his entire discography at discogs.com.
Yeah, I did 2 albums with Elvis. I say 2 albums. We did a session, and they used some of the songs on each album called Elvis in Memphis and Elvis Back in Memphis. I did a thing with the Box Tops. They did Moving On, and I did a solo on it, and Elvis liked that solo I did, so he asked for me on his album. Part of an album with Dean Martin and Connie Francis, and I did a lot of Millsap stuff. Yeah, Millsap, Barbara Mandrell.
On and Off Stage is John's first and only real commercial solo album release. So that's going to make it an album you'd probably want to have a physical copy of, or at least in your online collection. John did later release a series of CDs much later in his career, but this album here will be the one that most steel players and fans are going to be immediately familiar with. The second album I picked here is this album called Timeless. Now, this might be a good album to cover John's career with Conway Twitty. It's an interesting record because these are all unreleased versions of these Conway Twitty songs that were recorded in 1972 at Scotty Moore's Music City Recorders for an unspecified military recruiter program. So these were intended to air on radio in select markets similar to the Country Cooking with Lee Arnold and Navy Hoedown radio series. Some of you have probably heard these recordings with different country artists promoting the Navy, Marines, Air Force. And for whatever reason, these songs here on this album were just discarded and then recovered in the 2000s and given a hi-fi full mixing and mastering treatment and released as this CD called Timeless. So this features Conway's road band of Joe E. Lewis on bass, Tommy Markham on the drums, and John Hughey on steel guitar. Conway's playing the rhythm guitar, and they have Pig Robbins sitting in on the piano. So, like I said, this is a pretty interesting record, and it's kind of actually a bare bones takes. It's a lot of steel guitar front and center in the mix. Some of the Conway songs, of course, as well as Crazy Arms, Honky Tonk Man, and even a version of Proud Mary. Now, it's hard to go wrong with Pocket Full of Gold. This features arguably John's greatest recorded work in Look at Us, which is not only a great steel guitar song, but it's really one of the all-time country ballads in the modern era, generally speaking. But a lot of people are going to remember John Hughey for this Pocket Full of Gold album. It's 1991, and it's on MCA Records. I got this small set of male neo-traditional country singers here that John recorded with. These are three pretty kind of iconic records. This first one is a classic George Strait album, Straight from the Heart. This is going to be George Strait's second album on MCA. It features Sonny Garish and John Hughey on steel guitar. Foolhardy Memory, written by Byron Hill, great songwriter. This is one of the big George Strait #1 hits, at least back in the day. It was one of his first, I believe. I was only 2 years old at the time, so don't take my word for it, but it is a pretty great record. Marina Del Rey, Amarillo by Morning, they definitely put George Strait on the map. Now, this Keith Whitley record here is obviously going to be special for a few reasons. This is John Hughey playing on all the tracks on this record, if I'm not mistaken. It's also becoming a pretty collectible record. If anyone out there has an actual copy of this, it's Keith Whitley's first commercial country release, and it was a 6-song EP on RCA. A Hard Act to Follow is the name of it, from 1984. Now, this third album I pulled is the Joe Nichols Real Things CD. Now, this is by far and away the best Joe Nichols album that he ever made. And it features John Hughey on steel and Paul Franklin on resonator and dobro. There's a lot of classic country sounding stuff on here, some great covers, and it's a very tasteful record. It's one of the last albums, in fact, that John would have played on. And it's worth noting as well that John did play on a lot of commercial country records throughout the 1980s, 90s, and into the 2000s. And so that's why I've included this record here as a sort of example of that. John also worked on albums by Alan Jackson, Martina McBride, and a couple of those really, really big Shania Twain records as well. You should let me know in the comments what album that you would have picked to kind of celebrate John's playing here. Now, here's an album hopefully we could all agree on. I don't know about you, but I absolutely love this compilation that was produced by Pete Drake in 1991. It's only available on cassette and CD, but it's currently up on the YouTube Music site. So it may also be on Spotify and Apple Music, I'm thinking, as well. Everything on this album is great. In particular, there's 2 John Hughey tracks you may have not heard before, September Song and True Love. And both are just awesome recordings. I mean, the whole album is a collection of jazz standards by all the great steel guitarists in Nashville at the time. The only thing missing on this record is Buddy Emmons, of course. Pete Drake and Buddy Emmons, not the best of friends, I don't think. And maybe we'll get into the backstory on why that was more on a future episode if you're interested. Always a record that I'll think of when I think of John Hughey. Well, John Hughey, he's sometimes known as Papa John or Buttermilk John. He was one of the great steel guitarists in country music, and I don't know when we'll talk about him again, so I wanted to feature a full episode on him here, an episode that shows a lot of footage of John playing. And I hope you've enjoyed it. There's a lot of steel guitarists left to talk about, of course, so slowly but surely, we're going to get to everyone, I think. You can check back each week for a new episode here, and I really thank you for watching this video. The comments and the feedback that I've received since I started making these videos has been incredible. It's actually helped me in my research to find out all this great new information that I didn't know existed thanks to some of the feedback that you've left. So I hope you enjoy all the upcoming videos. Thanks for watching them. Keep it country. Keep coming back, of course, each week, a new video. And we'll see you next time. Hey.